The rain was falling in thin, silvery sheets when Daniel Ross pushed open the heavy mahogany door of the Orion Hotel. His boots left faint wet prints on the gleaming marble floor as he stepped inside, his dark coat dripping. The warmth hit him instantly, a sharp contrast to the damp chill outside, and the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne filled the air. He wasn't here for the luxury. He was here because the Orion hosted the annual East Coast Charity Gala every November, and tonight his daughter Sophie was performing in the youth orchestra segment. Sophie had been counting down to this for months. She had practiced until her fingers ached, the faint sound of piano drifting through their small apartment night after night. Daniel adjusted the strap of his worn leather bag. Years in the military had taught him to travel light. Even now, years after leaving active service, he still felt out of place in these kinds of venues. Too much gold trim, too many polished smiles hiding sharp eyes. The ballroom was already filling with people in tailored suits and glittering dresses. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne flutes, weaving through the crowd with practiced grace. In the far corner stood the grand piano, gleaming black, perfect. Daniel spotted Sophie backstage, her hair neatly braided, wearing a soft blue dress they'd found at a second-hand shop but made beautiful with her shy smile. She ran into his arms the moment she saw him. "You made it," she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it," Daniel said, kissing the top of her head. "You ready?" She nodded, though he could feel her nerves, and that's when he noticed the woman across the room. Tall, striking, with sleek black hair pinned up in a dress that looked like it cost more than Daniel made in 6 months. She stood with a cluster of businessmen, her laughter sharp and confident. People moved around her like she was the center of gravity. She caught sight of the piano and smiled faintly, as though it reminded her of a private joke. "That's Victoria." "Lane," Sophie whispered. "She's the CEO of Lane Global. They say she can do anything she wants." Daniel had heard the name. Lane Global was a multi-billion-dollar empire, shipping, tech, real estate. Victoria Lane was one of those people you saw in magazines, the kind who seemed untouchable. A few minutes later, as Daniel was helping Sophie adjust the sheet music on the stand, a ripple of laughter passed through the nearby crowd. He looked over and saw Victoria herself walking toward the piano. She trailed her fingers over the keys lightly, not pressing them, then turned to the man standing beside her. "I used to play when I was younger," she said with a smirk. "But Liszt? That's no joke?" Her gaze swept the room and, for some reason, landed squarely on Daniel. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Do you play?" Daniel blinked. "A little." She tilted her head, her smirk widening. "If you can play Liszt, I'll kiss you right here," the room chuckled. It was the kind of challenge meant to entertain the wealthy, playful, slightly humiliating. She didn't expect him to take it seriously. Sophie looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Dad, you don't have to—" But Daniel's gaze didn't leave. Victoria's something in her tone had stirred an old stubbornness in him, the same one that had kept him on his feet during 18-hour march and through sleepless nights. "In the desert? Which piece?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting him to respond. "Hungarian Rhapsody? No, too?" A couple of people laughed out loud. It was a notoriously difficult piece, a showcase of speed, precision, and artistry. Daniel stepped forward. "Fine," Victoria gestured to the piano, clearly amused. "Be my guest." He removed his coat, revealing the plain button-up shirt beneath, and sat down at the bench. For a moment, he just rested his hands on the keys, letting the cool smoothness seep into his fingertips. Then he began. The first notes were like a ripple through the crowd, sharp, confident, unhesitating. His fingers moved with the precision of someone who had lived inside this music for years. Each flourish, each run, was delivered with effortless clarity. The room, once filled with chatter, went still. Victoria's smile faltered. By the time he reached the frenzied, triumphant ending, the air in the room felt different. People were leaning forward, caught in the energy of it. He let the final chord linger before lifting his hands. Silence, then a wave of applause that filled the ballroom. Daniel stood, gave a small nod to the audience and stepped away from the piano. Victoria was staring at him, not smirking now, but something else, something she couldn't quite hide. She stepped closer. "I didn't think," she started, then stopped. Her voice had softened. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "Long story," Daniel said simply. Sophie rushed to his side, beaming. He taught himself while he was deployed. He had this tiny keyboard and Daniel gave her a gentle squeeze. "Sophie." Victoria's gaze flicked between father and daughter, something unreadable passing over her expression. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time that night, she seemed human. The applause slowly faded, replaced by the soft murmur of voices. Victoria Lane was still standing there, the usual sharpness in her expression replaced by a strange mix of curiosity and something else, something guarded. She glanced at the crowd, then back at Daniel, as if weighing whether to say what she wanted to say in public. "I'd like to speak with you after the performances," she said finally, her tone more measured than before. Daniel nodded, not giving her the satisfaction of asking why. Sophie still clung to his side, looking between the two of them with a mixture of pride and confusion. The youth orchestra began setting up, and Daniel guided Sophie backstage. She was performing in the second piece, a soft, lilting Mendelssohn arrangement, and he wanted her to focus. But, as she walked out to take her seat, he found himself distracted, his eyes straying toward the far side of the ballroom where Victoria now stood alone, swirling the champagne in her glass and watching the stage. When Sophie finished, Daniel's chest swelled with pride. Her small hands had moved over the keys with care, her brow furrowed in concentration. The music blooming around her like a story only she could tell. After the last bow, the audience began to disperse, some heading for the dining area, others clustering in small groups to talk business or art. Daniel was about to collect Sophie's things when a voice came from behind him. "Mr. Ross," he turned. Victoria was there, close enough that he could see the faint trace of fatigue around her eyes, the kind you don't notice until you're up close. "Walk with me," she said. They stepped out into one of the quieter corridors of the hotel, away from the noise of the gala. "You surprised me tonight," she admitted. "Most people fold when I challenge them like that. Especially with Liszt. You didn't," Daniel shrugged. "I've faced worse than a piano." A ghost of a smile tugged at her mouth. "I'm sure you have." "Sophie said you taught yourself overseas?" He hesitated. "Yeah, piano was a way to drown out the rest of it, the chaos." Victoria studied him for a moment. "My father used to play. He said Liszt was like war, all strategy and speed, but with moments where you have to risk everything." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Your father, was he military?" Her eyes darkened briefly. "He was Colonel Jonathan Lane. He didn't come home." Something shifted between them. A silent understanding that only people who'd lived close to that kind of loss could share before Daniel could speak. A man in a tailored suit appeared, whispering something in Victoria's ear. She nodded and dismissed him with a flick of her hand. Then she turned back to Daniel. "I have a proposition for you," she said slowly. "I'm organizing a private concert next month for investors. Our pianist dropped out. I'd like you to play." Daniel blinked. "I'm not a professional." "You could have fooled every person in that ballroom," she replied. "You'll be paid well." "And Sophie could come?" He opened his mouth to refuse, but she added, "It's for a veterans rehabilitation program. My company is matching donations." That gave him pause. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Victoria nodded as if she'd known he'd say that. "Let me know." Over the next week, Daniel tried to put the encounter out of his mind. He focused on work, fixing transmissions and replacing brake pads, but Sophie kept bringing up the gala. "She looked at you like she'd never met anyone like you before." Sophie teased one night over dinner. "She's a CEO," Daniel replied. "She's met everyone." But the truth was, Victoria Lane had lingered in his thoughts more than he cared to admit. Not because of her wealth or status, he'd long ago stopped being impressed by that kind of thing, but because he'd seen cracks in her armor when he finally called to accept her offer. Her voice on the other end was warm in a way he hadn't expected, The night of the private concert, the venue was an intimate candlelit hall in the city. Daniel arrived early to rehearse. Victoria was already there, standing by the piano with a glass of red wine in her hand. "You came?" she said softly. He gave her a wry smile. Wouldn't miss it. As he played that night, not Liszt this time, but a set of pieces she'd chosen, he noticed her sitting in the front row, eyes fixed on him. By the final note, her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Her lips pressed together as if she were holding something back. When the applause faded and the guests began to mingle, she came up to him. Her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it. "My father. He played that last piece for me when I was little. I haven't heard it since he died." Daniel met her gaze. "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said, and to his surprise, her eyes shimmered with tears. "Thank you." And right there, in the soft golden glow of the candles, the woman who had once smirked at him and tried to make a spectacle of him, cried.